A tale as old as time, a song as old as rhyme. Rhythm games have cemented their place in the halls of video game history. However, long gone are the days when people would idolize the one kid in their school who could perfectly play through the fire and flames on expert difficulty. But while the heyday of the rhythm game in the late 2000s is now over, one cannot ignore their impact or importance on the larger gaming landscape. So, how did rhythm games get their start, see a meteoric rise, and, just like a young pop star, burn out just as quickly? Today I present to you the rise and fall of rhythm games. As always, if you enjoy the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content. When it comes to claiming something as the first rhythm game, some people point to Dance Aerobics, or Dance Studio as it was called in Japan. This is fair, as you do move your body on a pad similar to what one would later see used for Dance Dance Revolution, but it's kind of like calling a minigame for the Wii Fit a rhythm game. Sure, there are motions set to music, but it's a bit of a far cry from what we would call a rhythm game today. It does get an honorable mention though, as it was released in 1987, and it would take nearly a whole decade for anything even close to it to be released. Then, in 1994, Masaya Matsuda would approach Sony and pitch them a game unlike anything that had come before it. Matsuda was the leader of the popular Japanese progressive pop rock band that was SAIS. They were huge in the 80s, but coming into the mid-90s, the band was starting to drift apart. Matsuda says that his inspiration for Parappa came from how big music videos were in the 80s with the rise of MTV. This, combined with his growing personal interest in creating interactive media, as well as his personal distaste of appearing in music videos himself, led him to want to create a music video game with colorful characters standing in for human performers. Sony, who was just throwing themselves into the console race after having been jilted by Nintendo, was eager for first-party titles and greenlit the project. While Matsuda was working on figuring out how the game would play, he discovered American artist Rodney Allen Greenblatt was already working for Sony in another office. Being a personal fan of Greenblatt's work, Matsuda instantly asked him to design characters for the game, and Parappa the Rapper was born. Matsuda says he recalls many of the marketing staff at Sony at the time saying, quote, "This is not a game," and even Matsuda himself says he wasn't sure. In fact, they only printed enough CDs to sell tens of thousands of copies, not thinking it would be very popular. But it flew off store shelves in Japan, and after it was released abroad in 1997, it went on to sell over 1 million copies, cementing Parappa as one of Sony's early mascots, and proving the concept of attaching button inputs to music. Following on the heels of Parappa was an absolute explosion of rhythm games from Japan, including many franchises which still endure to this day. In 1997, Konami released Beatmania, an arcade game designed to simulate DJing. Unlike Parappa, which used a traditional controller, Beatmania had a unique interface to make it more immersive, and they'd follow this in 1999 with Drummania and Guitar Freaks, which, yeah, let you simulate playing drums and guitars respectively. These arcade games are so popular in Japan that every year since 1999, Konami has released new versions of them. Just think about that. That's a new rhythm game every year for 21 years straight. Another major thing that Guitar Freaks and Drummania added to the genre, apart from the obvious plastic peripherals, was the song's tracks, which would vertically move notes down towards the player, indicating when to play them at the right time. And 1998 would also see the release of the first Dance Dance Revolution arcade game, a franchise that has seen a near comedic number of releases, innovations, and straight-up knockoffs. Seriously, there are still huge international tournaments of DDR to this day, and its cultural impact cannot be understated. And in 2001, Namco would release the first Taiko no Tatsujin game, a rhythm game which emulates the taiko drums set to Japanese pop music. And yeah, you might have seen a taiko machine here in the West, but these are wildly more popular in Japan. But let's take a quick step back to 1995 and head to the other side of the globe to Boston, Massachusetts, where a small company you might have heard of named Harmonix was just getting its start. Iran Agozi and Alex Rogopoulos had met in grad school at MIT's Media Lab. Here, they began to figure out ways to combine their shared interest in music and technology.
Almost everybody is born with this innate desire to make music, and everybody tries to learn an instrument at some point, and almost all of those people quit. And so the world is full of all these people who feel the urge to make music but have no way to tap into that desire, and we wanted to solve that problem, and we actually started.
They wanted to create a software system to help non-musicians experience the feeling of creating their own music. But they also realized that nobody was going to pay them to do this, so they started their own company. One day, while playing a flight simulator, Alex said, quote, "What if we use this joystick to control the music system?" And that was the flash of genius they needed. They drafted a demo of this and showed it off at MIT, which at the time had sponsors such as Sega and Yamaha. Iran and Alex say that the response was good, that people were amazed at their technology's ability to improvise music with just the use of a joystick. No years of music lessons required. Their first product as a company was a CD simply called Axe, basically a retail version of their joystick music improvisation system. To say that this performed poorly is an understatement. In total, they say they only sold 300 copies. They did, however, get a gig with Disney, creating software that could read a person's hand with infrared lasers, tracking if they went up and down, and raising or lowering the pitch in unison, which was featured at Disney's Epcot theme park. But apart from this, things weren't looking good. They had been a business for nearly 5 years and had almost nothing to show for it. Scrambling, they decided to take a trip to Japan and try and break into the Japanese karaoke market, which was a $10 billion business at the time. But once there, they were met with a crushing realization. Their improvisational music software didn't mix with karaoke, which was mostly about trying to perfectly recreate something a famous performer has already done. And they were met with polite but firm no's from Japanese businessmen. However, while they were walking the streets of Tokyo, depressed and anxious that their company might now be facing bankruptcy, they saw people crowding around rhythm games like Beatmania and Guitar Freak. And realizing how much people loved these games in Japan, they thought maybe they could try to recreate this success in the United States. So, Iran and Alex flew back home and started working on their first video game, Frequency. Frequency and its follow-up, Amplitude, would feature the player moving along a track of a song, able to switch back and forth between different instruments. And while Amplitude built up a cult following, neither game sold particularly well. However, these games did put Harmonix on the map as the Western game developer focused on the emerging genre of rhythm games. And this led Konami, the publisher of the aforementioned Beatmania and DDR, to reach out to Harmonix and partner with them to work on Karaoke Revolution, which was able to get to market before Sony's SingStar. Despite this, SingStar became vastly more popular, mostly due to Sony's name brand recognition and its ability to throw more money behind SingStar to market the game. Going off this, they made iToy Antigrav, which, apart from being a fun novelty game for the PlayStation 2's motion tracking camera, the game didn't really move the needle with critics. Despite this, it sold 4 times as much as both Frequency and Amplitude combined. Iran and Alex were at a crossroads. The investors in Harmonix were obviously ecstatic with the sales of Antigrav and wanted them to pursue more games in the same vein. But this ran completely opposite to why Iran and Alex started the company in the first place. Antigrav did nothing to make non-musicians experience the joy of creating music. Hell, it literally had nothing to do with music. When faced with the idea of creating more games like Antigrav, Alex said, quote, "It would have been an emotionally and psychologically crushing defeat." Thankfully, someone came to their aid. A California-based gaming accessory company reached out to them with an idea. Red Octane, the makers of arcade sticks and dance pads, called up Harmonix and said, quote, "Hey, we love your games. If we make a guitar controller, will you make the guitar game?" This was the fire that Harmonix needed, and they instantly got to work on what would be one of the biggest third-party franchises of all time. When Guitar Hero hit store shelves in November 2005, it quickly became a hit among consumers and critics alike. Interestingly, the game's sales only increased over time, largely through good word of mouth. Most games have a big sales window in the month that they release, and then slowly peter out, spiking every now and then with a big sale. But for Guitar Hero, quote, "When we saw that February sales were bigger than January's, we knew something was going on." And this huge success caught the eye of Activision, who was quick to snatch up Red Octane. But not before they had begun development of Guitar Hero 2 and Guitar Hero Encore Rocks the 80s, which released in 2007 and would be the last game in the franchise that Harmonix would work on themselves. However, just as Activision acquired Red Octane, Harmonix was also being scouted by other major games companies. Surprisingly, the company that purchased them was actually MTV. Harmonix's spot in developing the Guitar Hero games would be replaced by Neversoft, the company behind the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games. And the third core title in the series, Guitar Hero 3 Legends of Rock, would be the best-selling game of 2007. And heading into 2009, Activision announced that the game had grossed over $1 billion in sales. The first game ever to do so. Seriously, wrap your head around that for a second. Did you think that the first game to break $1 billion in sales would be Guitar Hero 3? I didn't, but damn if I didn't own it and play the hell out of it. Of course, after being acquired by MTV, Harmonix didn't just stop making games. They started working on the biggest rival series to Guitar Hero, Rock Band. Now, obviously, Rock Band became immensely popular as well, selling 4 million copies in its first year on the market. And this is coming from a game that was $169.99 for the whole box set. In fact, both franchises would go on to sell incredibly well, as they continually pumped out new games. If you count the spin-offs like DJ Hero and Band Hero, Activision published 20 rhythm games between 2007 and 2010. And Harmonix released 10 games of their own in that same time period. But while people were once clamoring for more rhythm games in the same vein, they were now feeling burnt out. Music game sales dropped by 50% in 2009, and by even more the following year. Clearly, the writing was on the wall, and in 2010, Activision shut down Red Octane. And Viacom, the corporate overlords of MTV, sold off Harmonix, which ultimately led the company to become independent again. Despite this, the incredible sales of the rhythm game rush in the late 2000s cannot be overstated. From 2000 to 2009, 5 out of the top 20 best-selling games in the US were rhythm games, and they even took up 3 out of the top 5. And while their heyday is certainly over, rhythm games as a whole have continued to see major support from both fans and game developers alike. Ubisoft released Rocksmith in 2011, which allowed players to plug in real electric guitars and learn songs. And while not nearly as popular as the games featuring plastic guitars, the Rocksmith series has received 383 consecutive weeks of DLC songs added to the game, only ending in April of 2020. And Harmonix has even continued to support the Rock Band franchise, with Rock Band 4 allowing players to re-download all the old songs they had purchased in previous titles, and 5 years after the game's release, they are still publishing more DLC music for it every week. We've even seen other rhythm game franchises spring up, including Ubisoft's immensely popular Just Dance series, which was still releasing titles on the Wii as late as 2019, because people were still buying them on a console 2 generations old. And speaking of dancing games, Harmonix themselves has developed the Dance Central series, which has also seen healthy sales. And there have been other titles which have innovated on the genre. Crypt of the Necrodancer, a dungeon crawler where the player and enemies move in rhythm to the beat, was a huge indie success, and even attracted Nintendo to license out the Zelda IP for a follow-up, The Cadence of Hyrule. Thumper, a quote-unquote rhythm violence game, featured the player moving down a track, having to make moves to survive based on the music being played. And in 2018, with the rise of virtual reality, we saw Beat Saber, which has evolved beyond being just a rhythm game and has become the killer app for VR in the eyes of many. And hey, literally weeks after this video will be published, Harmonix will be releasing their next rhythm game, Fuser, which perhaps more than their other games perfectly encapsulates the original drive of the company, allowing non-musicians to make music in real time, taking an expansive list of over 100 songs and allowing players to quickly swap in and out parts of those songs to make entirely new tracks. I was personally able to play this game at PAX East earlier this year, and while I'm not super confident that the game will sell well, I think Harmonix has proven once again that they are masters at identifying what makes creating music such an amazing experience and translating that into engaging gameplay. Thank you very much for watching this video essay on the history of rhythm games. If you enjoyed, why don't you consider subscribing and check out some of our other video essays, including one on the history of Flash games. Also, check out some of our weekly live shows. We always put up edited VODs right here on our YouTube channel, but you can follow us on Twitch and watch us record them live and interact with us in the chat. And if you have a few bucks to toss our way, we'd love it if you checked out our Patreon. But either way, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a wonderful day.